Good evening, my dear students. This is Mrs. Suhair Zaki, and now we are going to start our sessions for final revision of our science curriculum for Prep 2 students. Let's start our session for today. Final revision includes practicing answering different types of questions and model exams. So by the end of our lesson, you will be able to answer different types of questions, and we are going, of course, to answer the Ministry of Education model exams for science curriculum the first term. Model 1. Answer the following questions. Question 1. Complete the following sentences. Our first sentence. Some minerals have a luster similar to metals, such as the dash mineral. So let's remember together what is the name of a mineral that has a luster similar to metals. Yes, of course, one of the examples of these types of minerals is galena. So some minerals have a luster similar to metals such as the galena mineral. Complete the following sentence. B. The rock masses that penetrate the Earth's atmosphere are called. We have two types of rocks that came from space and enter our atmosphere. The rocks that completely burned into our atmosphere is called meteors, while the rock that penetrates the Earth's atmosphere and go to hit the Earth's crust and form craters which are big holes on the Earth's crust are called meteorites. In question 1, in the first model of the Ministry of Education, and the second part of question 1 is give the scientific reason. Give the scientific reason. Atmospheric pressure affects the melting and the boiling point of water. Let's answer this question. Of course, as the atmospheric pressure on pure water increases higher than the normal atmospheric pressure, its boiling point becomes higher than 100 degrees Celsius, and its freezing point or the melting point of ice becomes lower than 0 degrees Celsius. And as the atmospheric pressure decreases, it decreases lower than the normal atmospheric pressure. The boiling point of water becomes lower than 100 degrees Celsius. So, because of higher pressure requires more kinetic energy and thus a higher temperature for molecules to escape into the gas phase, increasing the boiling point. Changes in pressure also can affect the melting point because the pressure influences how easily particles can move between solid and liquid state. So atmospheric pressure affects both melting and boiling point of water. Question 1 gives a scientific reason. The rate of evaporation increases when temperature rises. Let's explain this sentence. Why the rate of evaporation increases when temperature rises. When the temperature rises, the kinetic energy of the liquid molecules increases. This makes it easier for more molecules at the surface to overcome the intermolecular forces holding them in the liquid state and escape into the atmosphere as a gas. So, as the temperature rises, the rate of evaporation, of course, increases. Question 1 and gives a scientific reason. C. The heater is placed on the floor of the room. Why we put the heater, or how can we explain the scientific reason for locating the heater on the floor of the room? This is due to the convection currents that we have studied in our curriculum. Warm air is less dense than cold air, so it rises up. While placing the heater near the floor allows it to heat the cooler, denser air at the bottom, which then rises up and circulates throughout the entire room, creating efficient heating. So we put the heater at the floor or on the floor of the room to allow the convection current to take place in the room by moving the hot air up as it has a lower density, while cold, denser air falls down to be heated, and this circle will go throughout the room to heat the room. Question 1 gives a scientific reason. Snakes are able to catch their prey at night. Why snakes are able to catch their prey at night? Because they have sensory receptors at the front of their heads, which enables them to detect infrared rays emitted by their prey. So snakes, by their receptors that exist in the front of their head, enable them to detect the infrared, which is the heat coming from their prey, and so they can catch their prey even at night. Question 2. Write the scientific term. The movement of tectonic plates parallel or side by side. What is the name of this type of movement? Yes, it's the transform movements. So, transform movements are the movement of tectonic plates parallel or side by side. Question 2 and the first part, write the scientific term. An organ in the plant where cellular respiration takes place. Of course, this organ is called mitochondrion. So, mitochondrion responsible for the cellular respiration of the plant. Question 2 and the second part of question 2. What happens if? What happens if a substance in one of its states gains thermal energy? What will happen to this substance? In this case, the particles in the substance move faster, increasing their average kinetic energy, and the temperature of the substance will rise. If enough thermal energy is gained at the melting or boiling point, the substance undergoes a change of state from solid to liquid, for example, or from liquid to gas, without a change in temperature until the transition is complete. So when a substance gains thermal energy, the molecules will move faster, and this increases the average kinetic energy, and the temperature will rise up. Question 2. And what happens if? What happens if a substance changes from gaseous state to solid state without passing through the liquid state? This process, of course, is called deposition. An example of this is the formation of frost, for example, where water vapor in the air turns directly into ice crystals. So, what will happen? The deposition process will take place, and a famous example for this process is the formation of frost, in which water vapor in the air turns directly into ice crystals without forming liquid water. Question 2. And what happens if? What happens if a zinc plate is placed in copper sulfate solution? We have studied this reaction during our studying of chemical reactions. And in this case, a displacement reaction occurs because zinc is more reactive than copper. So, the zinc displaces copper, zinc here displaces copper in its salt solution, forming colorless zinc sulfate, while the blue color of copper sulfate will disappear, and copper will deposit or form a red precipitate in the test tube of this reaction. So, what will happen? Zinc replaces copper because it is more active than copper. So it replaces copper in its salt solution, while the color of copper sulfate will disappear, forming zinc sulfate, which is colorless, and a copper will deposit down or form a precipitate with a red color in the test tube. Of course, this is the symbolic equation of this reaction. Question 2. What happens if Bendix solution is added to glucose sugar? Bendix experiment or Bendix test is an important test as a Bendix solution is an indicator that changes its color according to the glucose concentration. So when Bendix solution is added to glucose sugar, it changes the color, and the color ranges from green to yellow, orange, and brick red. So we have different color: blue, green, orange, and red. These colors depending on the concentration of glucose in the solution. Now we are moving to the third question, question 3. And we will start with the first part. Number 1, correct the following statements. The first statement: rocks are natural, solid inorganic materials with a crystalline structure and a definite chemical composition. This is the definition of minerals. So the correction of this statement will be minerals instead of rocks. So minerals are natural, solid inorganic materials with a crystalline structure and a definite chemical composition. Question 3, and correct the following statements and the second statement. The mineral mica is non-transparent. We have studied that the transparency of minerals ranges from non-transparent and transparent and opaque minerals. What is the transparency of mica? Of course, mica is an example of a transparent mineral. So our correction here is the mineral mica is transparent. Question 3 and the second part. Mention one importance for each of the following. The first part, infrared rays. Infrared radiation or infrared rays is used in many applications, including, for example, thermal imaging, night vision, TV remote control, fiber optic communication, and medical therapy for pain relief. So one importance where you can choose night vision for example. Question 3 and mention one importance for each of the following, and B, carbohydrates. So what is the importance of carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are the body's main source of fuel and provide energy through glucose, which is broken down during cellular respiration to produce ATP, which is energy currency of the cell. So one importance for carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the main source of our body's energy. Question 3 and mention one importance for each of the following, and the third term is stroma. One importance of stroma. Stroma is the fluid-filled space in chloroplast where the light-independent reactions or Kelvin cycle of photosynthesis take place, converting carbon dioxide into glucose using the energy from the light reaction. So stroma is the place where the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis take place. Now we are moving to the fourth question in our first model of the Ministry of Education. Question 4, and the first part is choose the correct answer. A. The material in which the forces of attraction are very strong is iron, water, air, oil. Let's examine each of these choices and what is the physical state of each one of them. Oil is liquid, air is a gas, water is a liquid, and iron, of course, is a solid. So if we differentiate between all of these choices about the forces of attraction, of course, we will choose the solid state, which is the iron. So the iron is the material in which the forces of attraction are very strong in these choices. Question 4. Choose the correct answer. B. Among the materials with low thermal conductivity is iron, aluminum, copper, and wood. Thermal conductivity is high in metals. So each of iron, aluminum, copper has high thermal conductivity, while the only material which has low thermal conductivity is, yes, of course, is wood. So among the materials with low thermal conductivity is wood, while all metals have high thermal conductivity. Question 4. Compare between. This is the second part of question 4. The first couple, divergent movement and convergent movement of tectonic plates. What is the difference between divergent movement and convergent movement of tectonic plates? Let's discuss the difference between them. Of course, for divergent movement is the movement where the plates move away from each other, allowing molten rock to rise and form new crust, like in case of mid-ocean ridges and African rift valleys. So in divergent movements, the plates move away from each other. So what about the convergent movement? In case of convergent movement, the plates move towards each other and collide. This can result in one plate diving under the other. So, in this case, the plates move towards each other, they collide, in some cases, one of them slides under the other and maybe pushing up to form mountain ranges, like in case of the formation of Himalayas. Question 4. Compare between melting process and boiling process. What is the difference between them? Let's discuss the first, melting process. Melting is the change of state from solid to liquid at a specific temperature. This temperature is called the melting point. This occurs at the surface and throughout the solid as it absorbs heat of fusion. So, melting is the change of state from solid state to the liquid state at a specific temperature called the melting point, like in case of ice when it melts at 0 degrees Celsius to change from the solid state to liquid water. What about the boiling process? The boiling process is the change of state from liquid to gas at a specific temperature. This temperature is called the boiling point, which depends on the pressure. So, in this case, the matter changes from liquid to gas at boiling point, like in case of water at 100 degrees Celsius at normal atmospheric pressure. Of course, water begins to form bubbles and begins to change from the liquid phase to the water vapor phase or to the gaseous phase as it absorbs the heat of vaporization. Question 4, and compare between, this is the second part of the question, physical change and chemical change. Let's remember together what is the difference between physical change and chemical change. Let's start by the physical change. Physical change is a change where the material change in its physical property, like in case of changing in the state from solid to liquid or from liquid to gas without changing its chemical composition. Chemical composition remains the same. And of course, these changes are reversible. So, after changing, for example, water vapor, we can condense the water vapor and water vapor change back into water and so on. So this process or physical change doesn't change the chemical composition of the matter, but its chemical composition remains the same. What about the chemical change? Let's remember together what is the chemical change. The chemical change means the change in the chemical composition of the matter. and forming new substance with different properties, like in case of burning wood or in case of rusting iron or cooking food, for example. And all of these changes are irreversible. So the matter cannot change back to its original, but it forms new substance with different properties than the substance that we start with. Question 4, and compare between, and we have another couple, ADP and ATP. What is the difference between ADP and ATP? Let's try to remember together. ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, has two phosphate groups and is a lower energy intermediate molecule. It's recycled into ATP using energy from cellular respiration. As explain the ATP. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, has three phosphate groups and is the main energy currency of the cell. Energy is released when the bond of the third phosphate group is broken, converting ATP back into ADP to power cellular activities. This was our last question in our first model of Ministry of Education for Science Curriculum Prep 2 students. Me, Mrs. Sohair Zaki, was with you today under supervision of the Consultant Science Office of Ministry of Education. This is our live stream, hoping you the best scores in your coming exam. See you next session, inshallah.